Let's talk about MongoDB. Right. So MongoDB is it's a NoSQL database, and so it's part of a family of quite a few databases that do not use SQL, structured query language. They don't use the model, the relational model, to represent data and associate records with one another. Instead, they format the data in other ways, either using XML, using JSON, using binary, or using some other ways of structuring their data and storing it either in a proprietary or non-proprietary format. Relational databases, like the name suggests, it creates a structure of the data by creating relationships between records that would otherwise just be unrelated. And they do that by using primary foreign keys, right? Creating these referential references between records. In non-relational databases like Mongo, for instance, these relationships can use references, right? You can have a field in one record reference a record, some other record in some other collection or table. But the main way of creating relationships is by embedding data inside of other pieces of data, right? Because Mongo allows you to format the data in JSON format. You could have arbitrarily complex objects, right, that contain other objects, that contain arrays of objects of arrays of objects of objects of arrays. I mean, you could have arbitrarily complex data that you're storing. Sometimes you can you could also refer to these to MongoDB as being an object database as opposed to a relational database, meaning you can store objects. You take a JSON object that has been formatted using JSON, right? And you can store the literal text string that represents that JSON object, store it into the database, and then retrieve it and query it and say, well, that object I put in there that had these fields with these values, well, I want it back. Retrieve it for me. So you're really working with objects back and forth. So it's a completely different way of thinking about the data and how you're storing it and retrieving it and querying it from the database. They do provide certain interfaces that allow folks that have been using relational databases for years, to find their way and says, well, this operation of retrieving is very similar to the way you do it in relational databases, right? And so they use some of the equivalents, and I will be doing that. I'll be doing an operation in Mongo, and then I'll say, well, this is very similar to what we do in relational databases. Again, just to build on your knowledge of the system that you already are familiar with. There are certainly other databases out there, or types of databases, and each type of database, they address different aspects or different problems, right? There's graph databases that are very good to represent data that is structured as a graph with that might have cycles, that might have paths that you need to you might need to follow a particular branch of F nodes that refer to one another. You have real-time databases that deal with real-time data that you have some measurements, either a thermocouple or wind speed or pressure that are reading information from the field. And you need to store that information and then be able to query it and aggregate it and be able to answer questions about that data. But this data is very peculiar in that you have a piece of information that is here now, but then it's gone. Half hour later, it's gone, right? Or it just occurs at one single moment and then it's gone. There was a temperature that just spiked, right? And then it's no longer there. But nevertheless, you want to be able to maintain some trace and be able to answer questions within a particular range of time. So it's a completely different world of dealing with different types of databases for their peculiar use. So certainly non-relational databases also deal with their own peculiar uses, right? Um, usually the data that they're storing can be very elastic in the sense that it can be unstructured as opposed to relational databases. Typically, they assume that the data that you're storing and querying about has a very specific structure. Non-relational databases such as MongoDB don't assume any structure with the data. As we'll see in a bit, you can create a set of documents or objects that are related to one another that don't have a specific schema. Just as opposed to in relational databases, you first have to create the table that has a specific set of fields with a specific data types. In non-relational databases like Mongo, you don't even have to specify a schema. When we create the data points that we store in there, it could be that each document that you store or each record that you store has its own fields, right? And there's no validation whatsoever. That's a little bit disconcerting from folks that are coming from relational databases, but it's certainly very, very common that the schema might evolve over time, right? That we can add fields, remove fields, change data types, and whatnot, right? It's elastic, right? It can adapt to unstructured data much better than relational databases. A lot of the what we normally task or burden the database to do for us, like referential integrity, making sure that the structure of the data is sound, right? That it abides by a particular schema. None of that is going to be available in non-relational databases or in MongoDB particularly. Instead, a lot of that validation, a lot of the processing of the data and checking to see that the data is correct and its correct structure, instead of having the database do a lot of this work, a lot of that is going to move towards the application layer, right? We already do a lot of validation on the client side. We do validation on the server side, right? We have a data model in the application level, right? We have classes, we have objects, right, that we instantiate that have a specific structure already. So there's quite a bit of validation that has already occurred, prior to the data storage. So we're gonna rely more and more on the application layer to do our structure validation. So we're going to install Mongo. To install Mongo, we're going to go to the website MongoDB, and from there you can download the community database. Right? MongoDB is going to try and sell you a package. It's going to try and sell you the Atlas database. There's no need for you to buy anything, right? There's a free version that obviously has its limitations, but they're going to be plenty for what we're going to be doing here in class. Okay. You know what? I forgot to start recording from my for YouTube. Let me record. Or am I recording? Oh, I am recording. Never mind.